Hello, everyone. It's Matt Woods from First Alert 4, and welcome back to Backstory STL. On this show, I interview local people whose life stories have inspired them to make a difference in their community. My guest this week is an author whose love for baseball has helped to keep a major part of St. Louis history alive. You know about our beloved Cardinals, but what about the St. Louis Browns? Major League Baseball's forgotten team still has a following to this day, and some of the fascinating stories in this episode show why. Here's the backstory of the St. Louis Browns and author Ed Wheatley. St. Louis's other beloved team that we're here to talk about today, that a lot of people don't know about, or either know the name but don't really know the history of it and the overall importance it is to St. Louis, which is such a baseball town. I think you've said the best baseball town.
Well, and I think we got a pretty good guy who says that all the time by the name of Bob Costas. He's very outspoken about what a special town this is. And it's not just the teams, the ownership, it's the fans as well. All three triangulate into this great history. And this is a history that goes back to 1860 when baseball was first played here at Fairgrounds Park. And then since that time, people don't realize we have had 4 Major League Baseball teams. In 1876 and 1877, the original class of the National League, the St. Louis Brown Stockings were in that. And they got kicked out because of gambling issues and game fixing, which was kind of prominent in that period. And then in 1884 came the St. Louis Maroons.
Okay.
And they were brought back into the National League to compete against the American Association Brown Stockings, unrelated to the former National League team. The term Browns is going to get really confusing in baseball history in St. Louis, but they were in the American Association. They were the best team in the American Association, won 4 straight titles in the 10 years that they were a league. And because they were so good, they asked them to join the National League in 1892. And for the first, up until 1892 to 1898, they had the name Browns. 1899, they took the name Perfectos, changed their color to a more red that they started calling a cardinal red, and then from then on, 1900 all the way up to the present, they were the Cardinals. But see, the American League did not form until 1901. And St. Louis didn't have a team in 1901, even though we were the 4th largest city in America. And, the gateway to the West and all the expansion, the industry, the railroads were all here and the river. But there was a team in Milwaukee called the Milwaukee Brewers in 1901 in the American League. And in 1902, because of the things they said about St. Louis, also the Cardinals were a terrible, terrible team. They were really bottom division, lowest of the teams in those early years in the National League. And so it was thought you could come bring the American League team in St. Louis, run the Cardinals out. And it was a 52-year love and hate relationship between the Cardinals. A lot of things happened, dramatic. A lot of forks in the road that every time the Browns came to that fork, they took the wrong fork. And that's what a lot of the stories are. Things that could have been.
Right.
And things that could have been where we're still here wearing, Browns uniforms and the colors orange and brown, but they were the wrong thing. The Cardinals survived. And, Branch Rickey, who plays a big part between the Browns and the Cardinals. He was originally with the Browns. He was a player, worst catcher in baseball history. This holds the record for most steals against him in a game at 12. The Washington Post said to run against Rickey, to steal a base against Rickey means simply run. That was the headline. But then he left the Browns and went to the Cardinals. Browns would not let him build the minor league system. The owner did not want to spend the money. Sam Braden had just bought the Cardinals and said, "Make me a winner," and put him in charge. And he built a farm system that led to World Series in 26, 28, 30, 31, 34, 42, 43, 44, and 46.
The golden age, I guess.
It was the golden age. I mean, they were all winning 105 games a year.
Right.
Somebody says, well, what happened in 1945? Stan went into the Navy. They were 2.5 games out. I think Stan could have made up those 2.5 losses, and it would have been different.
I'm sure his WAR that year would have been higher than 2.5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, so the Browns, that's what they were competing with. What if Rickey had stayed and created the minor league system, the first in baseball, under the Browns and not the Cardinals? There was a time where the Browns stadium, they didn't play in Sportsman's Park originally. They played up at Van Deventer and Natural Bridge, 5 blocks from Sportsman's Park, right across from Fairgrounds Park. They had a stadium called Robeson Field, after the owners who had taken over after Chris Von Der Eye, who had brought him into the National League. So Robeson Field was the last wooden grandstands in the major leagues. And in 1920, it burned down. It kept catching fire, but it burned to the point it was condemned. Why? Men smoked cigars all the time in those days, and they just put them down, and the wood structures would catch fire. So all of a sudden, the Cardinals didn't have a home. As I said earlier, they're not a very good team, so they don't have a lot of revenue. Where are they going to go? They don't have the money to build in St. Louis. It looks like they're going to have to find a city who'll give them a home, except Branch Rickey, another fork in the road, says, wait a minute. He goes the 5 blocks down to Sportsman's Park, talks to the Browns owner, says, this isn't really good business. You got this beautiful stadium, but it's only used half the time. How about we use it when you're not here? And DeCaspi Ball was always having dollar signs. He says, I'll give you this much money over the next 30 years. DeCaspi Ball didn't really divide by 30 because it wasn't very much money per year. It was a big number, but not. So what happens? All of a sudden, the Cardinals aren't paying for upkeep of a stadium, the personnel of the stadium. That was all the Browns. They were just paying this small annual fee. And then they take that money and invest it in the farm system. Yeah. And then on the second thing they did, they sold that plot of land where Robeson Field was because St. Louis was growing massively and expanding up to North St. Louis area in the north towards North County. He sold it to the public school system he kind of took them for a high price because they were desperate for a location for a high school that became Beaumont High School.
Oh,
the baseball factory, where there were more men in the major leagues from the 1940s and 1950s from Beaumont High School than any other high school in the country. So none of that would have happened if DeCaspi Ball just said no to the Cardinals. You can't move into my Sportsman's Park.
Maybe they moved. They moved
to
another city.
To another city. Yeah.
Wow.
But again, those are forks in the road, and there's many more into their circumstances. They go down. They had a great team in 1922, one of the best in baseball history, led by George Sisler. They had one of the greatest outfields with Johnny Tobin, Baby Doll Jacobson, and Kenny Williams. The only team in Major League history to have the same players for 5 straight years, and all of them hit over 300. It would have been 6 years, except Johnny Tobin hit 299 the year after. But they were a powerhouse. And Sisler was hitting 420 for 3 years he averaged 400. One of the greatest men in baseball that is really kind of forgotten because nobody besides us here knowing it and pushing that message out. But I will give credit to Bill DeWitt. He put a statue of George Sisler down in the statue of the players. He added George Sisler to represent the Browns and Cool Papa Bell to represent the Negro League stars and giants. So you got to give kudos to Bill DeWitt for that. But they lost to the Yankees by 1 game that year because Sisler had gotten hurt on September 10th, jammed his shoulder on a play diving for a ball, and so he was not effective the last 3 weeks. Again, he probably would have made the difference of a 1 game, and the Browns would have won the first pennant in St. Louis before the Cardinals in 1926. So there's just all these little what-if type things, and the Browns do finally win a pennant in 1944. But again, the breaks of the thing, it was like hey, we win the pennant. We're the best. No, wait a minute, we're not the best in the team. We don't get the full glamour and the full spotlight because the Cardinals also won the pennant. They'd also won in 42 and 43, so they've got 3 pennants in a row. So they had to share the glory of being the American League champions with the National League champion Cardinals. And the town, it was probably the greatest moment in St. Louis history, 1944 was the year, it was the 40th anniversary of the World's Fair. The thing we still today think so much is, our grandeur was the 1904 World's Fair. And 1944's 40th anniversary. Judy Garland's got her big famous movie, Meet Me in St. Louis. Everybody across the country was singing, Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis. Here in St. Louis, we were saying, Meet Me at Grand and Dodier for the World Series. The Fall Classic was in St. Louis. It was also the years, you talk about things being weird in history. Just the fortuitous vision of the number one film, besides the Judy Garland film, but the one that won the Academy Award that year was Going My Way with Bing Crosby. He's a priest. And what does Bing Crosby do? Throughout the film, he wears this Browns warm-up jacket and a brown sweatshirt and a Browns hat. And, here was this team that had crafted in 1911 the phrase, first in booze, first in shoes, last in the American League. But Bing Crosby's wearing their outfits in this film that won the Academy Awards.
Big deal back then.
Well, it is. It is all these historical coincidences, and between Judy Garland and Meet Me in St. Louis coming out, and the world singing Meet Me in St. Louis, that's where the World Series is from both teams, not just one. It was only the third instance of that happening. The other two were when the Yankees and Giants played in 1921 and 22 before the Yankees moved into Yankee Stadium.
And has only happened since obviously the Subway Series in 2000, but
then they weren't played in the same stadium.
Right.
And it happened during the COVID when they played in Dallas.
Oh yeah. Yep. You're right. Yep.
So, and there was one game they played in the Oakland, San Francisco. People like to throw it, but they were playing in both stadiums until the earthquake came. But that was a big deal. That's why St. Louis fans, really are the best, because how many cities, and they played in the same stadium. You could go and watch the American League. You could see Babe Ruth come, Lou Gehrig come, Ted Williams, Bob Feller, because you'd go watch the Browns. And then you'd come over and watch all the great National League players. So we got to see them all in St. Louis. It's not like in New York where the Yankees played way up in the Bronx, the Brooklyn played way down in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the New York Giants played over in Harlem, in North Manhattan. But here, it was all the same, and you just kept going to the ball game and seeing everybody.
So that's kind of part of that history of, why is baseball so important to the fabric of St. Louis, is that, it kind of started from like way back in the early 1900s, and then you had these two teams, but then so the Browns moved to Baltimore in 54, was it?
Yeah, the last game for the Browns was 1953. September 1953, they moved to Baltimore. Bill Veeck had bought the team from Bill DeWitt. The DeWitt family, Bill DeWitt Sr. was a longtime protege of Branch Rickey. And, Rickey was this very egomaniac kind of guy, fantastic knowledge of baseball talent, an observer. But, he was starting to get a little threatened by Bill DeWitt Sr., so he sends him over down the hall to the Browns to, you should be the president of the Browns. And he did. And he became a longtime general manager from that whole period, of decades with the Browns, and eventually bought him. And Bill Jr., the CEO today of the Cardinals, he was the Browns bat boy. Great stories we've had with Bill. One of them was when Babe Ruth came for his last appearance in a Major League Stadium. Was not the big famous one you see of him standing at home plate, looking out, leaning on a bat in the facade of Yankee Stadium. The next week he came to St. Louis. He had promised the American Legion team here in St. Louis. Stockholm Post, 1948, was one of the best in the country, and so was Belleville from across the way, and both of them would power themselves up into the quarterfinals of the American Legion tournament. And he came as a sponsor of American Legion and Ford. That was his last appearance in a stadium, because he'll die shortly thereafter. He knew he was dying, but there's all these pictures of Ruth in the stands with all these kids, and I can't tell you how many times when I bring that picture out at old events or retirement, that's me, with Babe Ruth. And it's really great to take these memories to retirement homes and nursing homes, and I do that a lot. Just it's a way to give back and do good for the community. But there's a great picture of Babe Ruth showing Bill DeWitt Jr., who's this little tiny kid, how to hold a bat to swing, and Bill's eyes are about this big and his mouth's down about drop.
Yeah.
But was the interesting point, since his dad, was there owning the team, and the president quickly had the photographer run out and get these pictures developed so he could come back before Babe Ruth left and signed them for Bill, and it's up in his office. But that jersey that we speak of was also the jersey that Eddie Goodell, the 3'7" little guy.
Yeah, of course we got to talk about that story.
Yeah,
one of
the
biggest stunts, blunders, whatever you want to call it, from the Browns' crazy history.
It was one of the. Bill DeVeck was a man about the stunts, but real quick, that jersey that was Bill's, that Eddie Goodell wore, Bill, what'd you do with the jersey after that? Because they put 1/8 the number on the back.
Right, because he was 3 feet tall.
3 feet 7 inches. 7-inch strike zone is all he had, and we'll walk through that play in a minute. But we took it home and we put it in the front room closet, and I wore it out for Halloween, and then my sister wore it the next 2 Halloweens. Can you imagine that? One of the most priceless pieces of baseball memorabilia became nothing but a Halloween costume. And then it was shipped to the Hall of Fame, and when the Cardinals built their Hall of Fame, they brought it back from Cooperstown.
So we still have it.
Yeah,
okay.
It's down in the office. But Bill Veeck bought the Browns from the DeWitt family. There's a lot of different reasons. It was basically more financial. Veeck had owned the Cleveland Indians, and in 1948 had taken the Indians to the World Series, and they were world champions. But then the next year he got a divorce, and part of the divorce settlement payoff required him to sell the Indians. So he was out of baseball for a couple years, and in 1951 he came and bought the Browns, kind of seen it as the opportunity. Again, another fork in the road. Veeck comes in with all the glamour and salesmanship of P.T. Barnum, Barnum Bailey Circus. And the Cardinals, at the same time, are no longer the Cardinals of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. They're aging out. They've had new ownership. Fred Sy was now the owner because Sam Braden, a few years earlier, had died of cancer. So Braden took over. Well, Braden and Fred Sy had this plan to build their own stadium down at Jefferson and Choteau, but they weren't handling the money correctly and paying the taxes. And Fred Sy was found guilty of this tax evasion scenario and was headed to jail. So here's the Cardinals owners going to jail. They're in a mess. Veeck comes in. It's the greatest storm happening, and he's going to run the Cardinals out of town. And he comes in and he starts outdrawing the Cardinals. He's got decorates Sportsman's Park with all this Browns memorabilia, which we have. He had all these panels that he put about Browns history. And a couple years ago, 30 of those panels came to us in the Historical Society. And all these things come together. But he would do things to tell the crowd. Like, you come to a Bill Veeck game, you don't know what's going to happen. Like, the game's over, and all of a sudden the gates open, and here comes an elephant. Here comes clowns. Here comes all kinds of things. And there's a circus. So it was always a twofer with Bill. It wasn't necessarily a twofer in games, but it was something else. So you're watching a circus right after the Browns game. Or all of a sudden, the game's over, and over the loudspeakers is Sweet Georgia Brown. And these men are carrying a basketball court out and setting it up at second base. And here come the Globetrotters. And you get to watch a basketball game. And I'm telling the truth, I got pictures of all this. I mean, so you never knew. Well, August 19th, 1951 was the 50th anniversary of the Major League, the American League. Mm-hmm. It was also the 50th anniversary of Greasy beer. So, Beck says, we're celebrating. Everybody who comes will get cake and ice cream. And he was a man to his word. I mean, Bill was the kind of guy who would walk around. He only had one leg. He lost it in World War II.
Oh, really?
And he had a wooden leg. Mm-hmm. He was a chain smoker, and it had an ashtray in it. So if he had his wooden leg, he was always wearing shorts, too, because of the heat of the summer. And he, smoking, using his ashtray, or sometimes he was out walking without the wooden leg. But he was out, hey, kiddos, what do you want? He was buying people peanuts and soda and beer, not the kids, but the adults. But so he was out there, and people knew it was good to be at a game with Bill Veeck. So this day, cake and ice cream is a doubleheader. The first game, they're playing the Detroit Tigers. And between the game, they come out with the men carrying this huge, huge cake. And like in those days of the early 50s in the movies and that, always a bathing beauty would pop out. Well, they get this cake out there. It's not a bathing beauty. It's a 3'7" little guy wearing a uniform with 1/8 on it. Now, people will tell me, and we've got the scorecards over there, they looked at the scorecard, and it says Goodell, 1/8, along with everybody else in a number. And people are like, that's Bill Veeck, who, you don't know what he's up to.
He's pulling a prank or something.
Yeah. So we did that, and all of a sudden, he had publicized the day before that Frank Sauce, and Frank was one of the last three Browns, passed away 2 weeks ago. But Frank Sauce was from Washington, Missouri, one of the greatest college and minor league hitters ever. Still holds records for college and minor league hitting. But Frank had also enlisted in World War II. It was the V1 club organization because Annapolis didn't have enough space. They had an Annapolis equivalent for the Navy at Notre Dame. So he became an officer in the Navy. He was on boats. He actually became what we would call today the third leader of the SEALs. The first leader got killed at Annunzio. The second got killed at Normandy. And then Frank took over, and it was Frank's mission to lead the assault, the landing on Japan when the A-bomb was dropped. And he was shortly thereafter rode through the streets of Hiroshima. I've sat with an interview with him and interviewed him for several hours, and it's just one of the most amazing things he talks about. But what a true American. So he came back and started playing baseball when he got out of the Navy. But he still had a Naval Reserve commitment because he was in this officer program. And that's when he set all these records. And he just got brought up. Veeck talked him into coming up because he also struck oil when he was in between because he was working. He was down in Wichita Falls and in San Antonio down in Texas, and he was investing. And he wasn't sure he wanted to play baseball in 1951 because he'd lost all these years, and he was aging and having his family. But Bill Veeck talked him to coming back. So he had all the people. He was all the newspapers out in Washington, Missouri, suburb of St. Louis. They all came down in buses to watch Frank Sauce. His play. Frank's going to start in right field, so the stands are full. But Frank had signed when Veeck bought the team in July 4th of 1951. So he's just getting himself back into shape. He's got bad calluses on his hands and his shoulders hurting. So he'd even told the second baseman, if the ball's hit to me, you got to run out here because I'll probably throw it back at you underhand because I can't throw. I don't even know why I'm in here. But Veeck has told the world, Frank Sauce, this great prodigy hitting is going to be playing. So he's supposed to lead off the bottom of the first. They got out of the first inning without a ball going to right field. And all of a sudden over the loudspeaker, now batting for Frank Sauce, number 1/8, Eddie Goodell. And people were like, what? And all the people from Washington are, wait a minute, we drove all this way with buses to come to see this. And out of the dugout pops this little 3'7" guy swinging bats. The Detroit Tiger managers comes running out. What's going on? Ed Hurley is telling Zach Taylor, the Browns, get out here. Ed Hurley's the umpire. Taylor comes out with a contract that they had filled and signed out and sent. It was in the mail. It was legal. So Ed Hurley says, play ball. Bob Kane, the pitcher, says, how do you pitch to a 3'7" guy with a 7-inch strike zone? And he says, I'm going to throw underhand. And Hurley says, no, you're not. You got to throw overhand. And Bob Swift, the catcher, lays on his belly to catch and he says, no, you got to get in your squat. So 4 balls right over his head, and he walks. And the whole time he's walking to first baseman. Eddie Goodell was kind of like a vaudeville star. So he was hamming it up all the way to first base. And Jimmy Delson comes out to run for him and pinch run. And he's hamming it all the way back in the dugout. And the reporters grab him right away and say, why didn't you take at least one swing? One time. Maybe you could have run. And he said, Bill Veeck, who was an old, like I said, he lost his leg in World War II. He was a tough old ex-Marine. He said, Mr. Veeck said there's going to be a man on a roof with a rifle. And if I swing, he's going to shoot me dead. So I didn't swing. And that's a true story. But baseball didn't like it. They did not like that.
They tried to take it off the official record, right?
Well, actually, not only did they try to take it off, they did. And if you look at the 1951 record books and the official book that would come out from Major League Baseball, it doesn't even show. So wait a minute. Did Frank Sauce get on first base? How did Delson get on first base running? It was like all this chaos. And in 1952, they put it into year results, that career. So Eddie Goodell has this perfect at bat, 1,000.
On base percentage, 1,000.
1,000, yeah. And baseball was upset. The other owners did not really like Veeck. He was outspoken. He did a lot of crazy things. There were times that between the Indians and the Browns that he had signed Satchel Paige and Larry Doby with the Indians. Larry Doby was the first African-American in the American League. On July 5th, 1947, Jackie had come with the Dodgers on April 15th. Mm-hmm. But just a few days later, the Browns, and this is something that most people don't know, they don't remember, they forget, that the Browns, Hank Thompson and Willard Brown were the 3rd and 4th African-Americans in the league. The Browns were the first team to have 2 African-Americans. And, I talked to Bill DeWitt. I said, what'd you think? You were a bat boy. You saw them out there in July 1947. What were you thinking? He said, well, I thought it was really nice that in the outfield during batting practice, I saw them together and that they had each other, which was something that a lot of the other teams, when they eventually would get one African-American on their lineup, it was by themselves, so they were always left out. I mean, it just was not a good scenario because a lot of the hotels would not let that African-American player stay with the whites. But the Browns brought in 2. They brought him in from the Kansas City Monarchs, Hank Thompson and Willard Brown. And as I said, Willard Brown will get inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. He was a big they called him Home Run Brown was his nickname from the Negro Leagues in the Caribbean. But Veeck had talked about, I'm just going to create a whole team and buy the Philadelphia Phillies and make it an all African American team. So the owners were quite upset with Veeck, and then he pulls a stunt 4 days later. It's called Grandstand Manager Night. Everybody in this one section will get a placard, and it says yes or no on each side. Zach Taylor, the Browns manager, is sitting on a rocking chair in his street clothes on top of the dugout. and there's a PR guy who would ask questions. Infield in, infield out, intentional walk, bunt, steal. Was it a travesty of the game? The fans loved it. Connie Mack, who they were playing, the Philadelphia A's, he loved it. And I've got pictures of him laughing right in the midst of the crowd with all these people with the placards. Great pictures. But, Hank Arf, let's say as an example. Hank Arf was a big, burly Browns first baseman. Not very fast. I did grow up with him and knew him. He played with my dad. And he walks. Up goes the sign. Should he steal? Up go the signs. Yes. Well, by this time, the Philadelphia A's know what's going on. Watch that section over there. So the Browns were told, do what you're told, what the fans say. So Hank, okay, he starts running and he's thrown out by 25 feet. A travesty of the game, the other managers are upset. However, the Browns won that game. And maybe they should have used grandstand managers the whole time.
Couldn't have been too bad.
Yeah, but it was all those things were building up in baseball to block Veck and get him out of baseball. Because what happened, as I said, when Cy went to jail from the Cardinals owner, it looked like the Cardinals were going to Houston. It was in the works to move them to Houston until Augie Bush stepped in. And Augie Bush stepped in and said, no, I'm going to buy him. He thought, well, that's a lot of free publicity and good publicity if I own a baseball team. So he bought the Cardinals. And he will eventually buy Sportsman's Park as well. And the quick side story was, I bought Sportsman's Park. I'm changing Major League Baseball. I'm changing the name to be Budweiser Park. And baseball says, no, you can't be involved with alcohol.
Did they sell alcohol at games back then?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. A lot of times it was 3-2 beer, and then that changed. And they said, we're not, going to advertise about beer with the name Budweiser. You just can't do it. And he said, fine, name it after me, Busch Stadium. Guess what came out 6 months later? Busch Beer. You don't mess with Augie, right? So anyway, baseball is tired of Veck. Even though he had won the World Series in '48, was outdrawing the Cardinals here in 51, 52, and 53. Mm-hmm. He tried to move the Browns to Milwaukee, but the Boston Braves held that geographic ownership. Because where their minor league teams and that, there was declared ownership rights, first rights. So they blocked Veck from moving to Milwaukee by moving from Boston to Milwaukee. To get out of the two-team scenario in Boston, they went for the riches of Milwaukee, and that's how they got there. So he was looking other places, and finally they forced him to sell. And the interesting kind of joking story is Baltimore had always been in the picture because, see, in 1903, Baltimore was part of the original American League class in 1901, the first 8 teams, just like Milwaukee was and moved to St. Louis. Mm-hmm. In 1903, the American League moved the Baltimore Orioles to New York to become the Highlanders and change their name to the Yankees. So the Yankees were never a part of the original American League team. They were the Baltimore Orioles. So Baltimore had, for these 50 years, had been all upset that they lost their major league team, and they were always trying to get a team. And Veck tried to move him there, but ownership would not approve him moving. They would only approve him selling. And so when I give talks in big audiences and crowds, they go, well, who was the person who really caused the Browns to leave? I'd like them to come back, because the Browns had a strong following. The Cardinals had a good following. The Browns it was kind of like a white collar versus blue collar. And, so many people talk about the love of their parents and their grandparents for the Browns. Mm-hmm. And they remember them with their Browns hats and all the games and scorecards. But I always joke, if you really want to blame somebody because you blame her for everything else, blame Nancy Pelosi. And they all go laughing, because her dad was the mayor of Baltimore, who was deep in the negotiations to get the Browns to Baltimore.
Really?
So that is a true statement when I say it, but it is a
funny.
funny. And the interesting thing is, they let the Bill Veeck come back into baseball a few years later, and he takes the White Sox to the 1959 World Series.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I mean, they kick him out, but they let him come back.
Huh.
So the 1959 White Sox played the Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series. So.
Interesting, man. Well, do you think the Eddie Goodell stunt, is that something tipped it over, or was that just part of the grand scheme of man, we got to get this guy out of here?
I think it was turning the temperature up to make the water boil.
Right.
I mean, because it was a pure stunt. It was, defacing the game to an extent. But Frank Sauce, the man who Eddie Goodell hit for, he said it was the greatest piece of entertainment genius I have ever seen. So he had no resentment. I've got him on. I've interviewed him so many times on film and things, and he said that. That's what he said. I think it was outstanding. But I mean, you're also, what are you going to do? Bring a one-legged guy up next? I mean, that's what everybody kept saying. You're defacing the game. And then when you do the grandstand manager night 4 days later, after being warned, we didn't like what you did on Sunday with the Eddie Goodell game, and then you do something, and it was just it was he was turning up the spigot all the time, and he was also running out of money too. He had thought, if I run the Cardinals out of town, all that revenue they're getting is going to come my way.
Yeah.
And then when Bush bought the club, he was extended. He didn't have the finances. And you're not really going to ever compete against Augie Bush in the Brewery. And he said that, I just can't compete here. I mean, to tell the story is, he had signed Tommy Lasorda, who was a young pitcher. He had acquired him from the Dodgers, and he had penciled in Lasorda there to be a starting pitcher in the rotation. And then he actually returned him back to the Dodgers, saying, "I can't afford to pay him." And that's, baseball started squeezing him financially, and he just gave it up. And it's, it's really amazing to read through the things. And we had Bill's son, Mike Veeck, at our annual reunion luncheon. Do you believe this? This is why the Browns in St. Louis are the best baseball team. And Costas, as I said, says it, and Costas comes to my luncheons. Since 1984, every year except the COVID year, we have held a Browns reunion luncheon. Back when there were more living players that were there, and I bring in, like Rick Dempsey and Jerry Rice, and all these players that can have ties, and we had Mike Veeck here this past summer, and we have 300 to 400 people at the MAC. For this big fancy luncheon, and these people come in. So this room here at the MAC with the crystal things, and you're still holding. How is this? The team hasn't played in 70 plus years, and you're still getting 300 to 400 people every year for this, which is important because the New York Giants, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the Philadelphia A's, the Boston Braves don't do anything. But we have this fan club, over 700 participating members from across the country come, and we do events. At the winter warm-up, we do a part about the Browns, thanking again DeWitt and the Cardinals for keeping us relevant. We had a round table in March to kick off, kind of our hot stove leaf thing into baseball, and we pick a topic of baseball history tied to the Browns. And every year since this book came out, we wrote this book, and it energized the Browns' legacy. I wrote this in 2017, and was picked as the best book published in baseball, Baseball Digest, and a couple other entities got SABRE recognition. And it led to a film, PBS coming and saying,
"Yeah,
would you make this film?" Which set records of viewership. And it was can you do a sequel because it's so well? And yeah, I mean, the first film, which John Hamm narrated for us,
Yeah.
It was kind of like the chronological history of it.
Right.
And I remember when it was being shown on PBS, immediately being asked, "This is unbelievable. What can you do?" I said, "We didn't really tell the full story I wanted to because of time. Because the second film was about people's memories, people's emotion, what the team meant to them, and what it was like to go to those games, and the 100-year-old lady Gert Slama talking about sitting out on the bench after all the games, and all the players would come over and sign her scorecards and talk to her about the encounter with Babe Ruth, the African American gentleman Nate Crump, who just passed away a couple months ago at 104, talking like us being an African American going to a ball game in the 40s and 50s when the right field pavilion was designated as for the segregated area for African Americans, because Sportsman's Park was the last facility, major league park, to be integrated in June 1944. They were the last. But another Bill Veeck story that reminds me, the pavilion was in right field. Mm-hmm. It had this 11-foot wall, 26-foot screen that went to the roof. It was called Fenway West because it was just like the Green Monster, but we had a fence out there for most of the time. Bill Veeck came to town and he said, "You know what? I want to change things. When the Browns are in the field, the fence is up. When the Browns are at bat, the fence is down." And he started to institute that in Major League Baseball.
And they allowed it?
No, they heard about it because they were doing some things to make it happen, and they went in there and said, "You can't do it." So I mean, that's how he was always testing. But it's also, as a side note, why did Stan Musial only hit 475 home runs? Because those balls he rang off that screen for doubles all the time would have been home runs most other stadiums. Mm. But I mean, see Veeck right there. Hey, we're gonna, drop the screen when we're batting and put it up when they're not. You can't have those ground rules. But it was, it was saying. So the movies really, the one was The Team Baseball Forgot. That was the first one with John Hamm, and then we did the second one, A Baseball Legacy. Fans Remember the Browns.
Was that also PBS?
That was also PBS.
Okay, I haven't seen the second one. I'll have to go watch that one.
They were all nominated for Emmy Awards, and we won Emmy Award for it, and it was called Baseball Legacy. Fans Remember the St. Louis Browns, and it was people bringing their memorabilia and telling their stories, and there's probably the hardest story in there to film, and then actually doing it during the pledge break, and this is a special, really kind of a announcement for your viewers that is very important. After the first film came out and the book came out, okay, I was at this charity event, big charity event, and this man comes up and says, "You're the Browns guy?" I guess, yeah. "Well, I've been wanting to talk to you." And the way he said it, I'm like, "Whoa, what did I do?" And then all of a sudden I look back at him and his eyes are starting to water. He says, "I've been wanting to talk to you. I need to tell you something." And tears starting to come down his eyes. I'm like, what? And then his wife comes over and says, "Is that him? Did you tell him?" And I'm thinking, what's going on? And she's starting to cry, and I'm like, this crowd of, 100 people or more, this is in the middle of this crowd, people are like looking, and why are these people crying? And he goes, "My dad has gone from dementia to Alzheimer's, and he's in a home. And I go and visit him, and I sit and watch TV with him 1 or 2 nights a week on the weekends, and just sitting with him, watch TV, and, kind of silence. We buy him Christmas presents, birthday presents, Father's Day, and, shirt or sweater, doesn't mean anything. I knew he was a Browns fan, and I saw your book and movie, and I ran out and bought it. I took him and gave him that book. He took it. He said, his eyes lit up, and he started turning pages, and he started pointing and naming players and telling about them. And he did that on and on, which is following up with doctors that long-term memory in those situations can come back with a trigger, the book being the trigger. Something that he loved so much was a trigger.
Yep.
The short-term memory, not so much. But he's telling me this story, and I went, holy cow. And then he hit the clinker and got me choked up. He said, well, I want to thank you. You gave me my daddy back. We've not had a talk like that in over a decade. It's like I'm back talking to my dad about baseball.
That's cool, man.
And that's the message that people need to understand, that as we have more and more dementia, Alzheimer's,
Oh yeah,
find
my
these
grandma's
things.
got it. It sucks.
Find something that they had a passion about in a book. It doesn't have to be my book. It's any book, It does help. And, to be able to do that and to go into nursing homes and retirement homes and talk about the Browns, the Cardinals, the 44 World Series and all that, take these people back to memories. And I always leave time at the end for them. And all of a sudden, a guy will pull out his wallet. Here's my Brownie Brigade and my Knothole Gang cards. From they haven't given those out since the early 40s. He's been carrying his wallet that long, and that's what it really meant to him. Or the lady, want to see where my ticket was in the 44 World Series? I got it right here. But you let them tell stories, and especially in a retirement facility, nursing facility, they're doing that in front of their peers. So all of a sudden, they're going to be hot tuna that night at dinner because they got to do this talk and everybody asking them questions. So doing all this in the memories, you keep it alive, not only just for those moments, but you stay the greatest baseball team in baseball city in America.
Yeah.
Because of all this.
And so, what made you want to research all this stuff and keep it alive? What's your motivation?
Well, my motivation's pretty simple. One, this is the best baseball town in America. But we need to remember it's more than the Cardinals. It's the Cardinals, it's the Browns, it's the Negro Leagues. Right. And my dad played professional baseball, and then when they retired, he played with all these guys who, a lot of them played minor league baseball, but they were in the late 50s and early 60s. We had one of the greatest semi-pro baseball leagues in the country of ex-major leaguers and ex-minor leaguers, and a few of them. But on any team that had 16 or 18 players, 4 or 5 of them had played in the majors. And I bat boyed for those teams, and I got to know a lot of these guys in the story. And multiple had played for the Browns, and you never hear about the Browns. So I had things, and I collected stuff as a kid and still have all these things. And the Browns, nobody knows who they are. And we had this fan club going that started in 1984. And it was about the time I saw it starting to, people were aging out who had watched the Browns. We still do have a lot of people that were there in those last several years, but you got, they're in their 80s and 90s, But I need to energize them. And I said I was going to retire. I will take over. I got a plan. My first plan was to use all the archives and all the things and the memorabilia I could get and, write this book. It became a bestseller, got the recognitions that we spoke of. And PBS comes and does it. So it's like, there's a purpose to what we do, not only to bring back happy memories to people, but to keep this team alive. Because as I said, Brooklyn Dodgers, New York Giants, Philadelphia A's, Boston Braves, they don't have anything. And we were making the films. We were over at the Gateway Grizzly Stadium just across the river, almost just a mile or two from Busch Stadium by the crow's flies, as they say. And we were making it look like Sportsman's Park. I had for the film, I laid out all this memorabilia from the owners and papers and all kinds of things from the 1940s on the desk, and we had all this stuff. So it looked like the 1940. We had his personal ashtray that says the Browns on it and a cigar kind of off on it. So we had all this stuff, and then in the locker room, I brought in all these relics of of uniforms, actual Browns uniforms and jerseys and jackets and, spikes and pants and hats, and had them in the lockers going, so it looked like you were in the locker room there. And we were out in the field and had some old seats in an area where it looked like it was the wood seats, where look, so you could look at the field with a little blurring of the lens. It looked like you were in Sportsman's Park. So the leadership of the Frontier League happened to be there, and the leadership of the Gateway Grizzlies. They said, "Look at what is all this stuff? This is unbelievable." I said, "Yeah, we're making this film," and there's like, "We need to have a Browns night." Yeah, you do. And that created Browns Night at the Gateway Grizzlies. And ever since 2018, each year, they give us one of the first picks of the season, because we will fill the stadium with people walking around in Browns jerseys and shirts and hats. And we give away, we'll pick a year. Like the very first one had to be George Sisler, the greatest Brown of all. I mean, this is something else too. People forget. George Sisler not only was one of the greatest hitters ever in the game, and Ruth and Cobb, in that first time, you've seen the famous picture of them together at Cooperstown, standing and sitting. They had dinner that night, and they were talking about who would they pick if they had to pick the team. Who would be their first pick? George Sisler, because he was such a good hitter and player. Great defensive first baseman as well. Kind of gets cut short because of Lou Gehrig being from New York, and all his home runs. But Gehrig never hit over 400 and things like that. So we did him. He was the first ever. The Browns had the first ever MVP in Major League Baseball in 1922. George Sisler, the first ever MVP. So the bobblehead came out. There had never been one. Like, holy cow, this is that first night. At 4 o'clock, they're wrapped around the stadium to get in for their George Sisler bobblehead night. And we got in there. We have a special beer can with all his stats on that was crafted by a local brewery over there. And that became a tradition, because I dressed the Grizzlies in 1922 retro uniforms. And the home team I dressed in 1922 Washington Senators uniforms. And then, well, it was such a success. I mean, it was like sold out. Next year, Roy Sievers. Roy Sievers went to Beaumont. We talked about that, the high school. There was the baseball factory earlier. And he became the first ever American League Rookie of the Year. So here are the Browns. How many people remember? They had the first MVP and the first ever American League Rookie of the Year. So we did 1949, Roy Sievers bobblehead, dressed the team in 49 uniforms. And then, we had Don Larson, Mr. Perfect Game World Series. People forget he was a rookie with the Browns. And he would give me this, "Hey, Eddie, when's that lunch and I'm coming?" And he would come every year, and he would sit and said it was because of the Browns there was Don Larson. Without the Browns, there would be no Don Larson. He sat and signed. He said, "For you, they're all free." So everybody that came up, you get an autograph, you got, free. Everywhere else, it's over $120. But for the Browns.
All right.
And so I did a Don Larson. So as we celebrated his 90th birthday, we did Satchel Paige, who, one of the greatest men to ever play baseball, one of the greatest from the Negro Leagues, but the greatest to ever play the game, period. He played for the Browns in 51, 52, 53, was an all-star in 52 and 53. Wasn't an all-star in 51 because he didn't come to the Browns until July 4th. And the game was the next week, so they'd already picked the teams. And we've done others. We did Marty Marion, the great Cardinal, but he was a Brown also. 66 men played for the Cardinals and the Browns. Unfortunately, the guys like Hornsby, Marion, Jim Bottomley, all these guys, their great years were with the Cardinals. Their down years, they didn't want to leave St. Louis, so they played for the Browns. Even Dizzy Dean pitched for the Browns.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'll make a comment. I said, when Dizzy Dean pitched for the Browns, some guy in smart aleck in the eye says, "He pitched for the Cardinals." Hold on, buddy. Dean won 30 games. Last National League pitcher to win 30 games in the major leagues, in the National League, excuse me. McLean won it in 68 in the American League. But Dean in 34, when they beat the Tigers in the World Series, was the last to win 36 World All-Star game. Luke Averill shot a line drive off his toe and broke his toe and foot. But as bullheaded as Dizzy Dean was, he said, I can pitch. I'm better than anybody. I mean, Dizzy had the philosophy, if you're a fastball hitter, you're only going to get fastballs from me. If you're a curveball hitter, you're going to get curveballs from me because I'm going to show you I'm better than you. His stats would have been so much better, and they were great, but they could have been super great if he had not taken that philosophy because he just thought he was better. So same way, I got a broken toe, it doesn't matter. And he threw, and he ruined his arm. And then they would cut him in 37. The Cardinals did. He spent a couple years with the Cubs, kind of as a cameo type thing, and then he was really out of baseball. He did not spend that much time really in Major League Baseball, but he went into announcing for the Cardinals and the Browns. And in 1947, the Browns were terrible. They lived up to their last in the American League slogan, but he would always say, "This pitcher, why is this guy on the mound? He can't get anybody out. Heck, he can't hit the side of a barn, And he would just say things like that. And the pitchers were upset. And the teachers of St. Louis were all upset. They wanted him fired because he had his slang from, the Ozarks or Mississippi Delta. He's always telling you he was from somewhere else growing up. That's kind of how he got the name Dizzy. But he had this Zorilla sluds in the third, and all the kids were emulating him in school, and the teachers were all upset. Yeah, Zorilla sluds in the third. He had all these little words that sidekicks. So they were trying to get him. So he's saying, I can even get everybody out, and it's the pitcher said, well, you think so? Get down here. So the the Browns signed him to a one-day contract on the last day of the season, 1947. So old Dizzy takes the mound, and he's mowing them down, pitching a shutout, even gets a hit. He hurt himself running from first to second after the hit. He pulled a hamstring. It wasn't like in the World Series in '34 when he was running from first to second, and the double play relay to first base hit him square right in the head, knocked him out. And the Detroit press headline the next day was, "X-rays of Dean's head show nothing." It was the headline of the newspaper. But but he did come out, and as he stiffened up, even though he had a shutout going, his wife was screaming, "Get the bum out of there!" And he knew he was going home with that night. So but he did. That's Dizzy Dean. Everything he said he would do, he did, and he did it with the Browns. One game.
Yeah. Anything else that you wanted to mention?
How
can people get involved with all the Brown stuff?
You can go to our website, which is STL.com is our email address, and STL Browns is also our website. We have our history there. We have our events there. We also have how to join, and it doesn't you do memberships. It's very $30, or you can give as much as you want. We produce Pop Flies is the magazine that comes out, thick magazine about baseball history, kind of a focus towards the Browns. Like this year is the 80th anniversary of Pete Gray coming up to the majors. Now, Pete Gray, for many people who don't remember, he was a one-armed ball player who made the major leagues. Bill Veeck did not own the Browns yet when Gray was playing. So we've had a 3'7" guy, we had a one-arm guy. But Pete Gray came up in 1945, 80 years ago this year, and so this edition of Pop Flies coming out is all about Pete Gray. And he it was justifiable. You got to remember, in 44, 45, the war's still going on, World War II, and a lot of the good players are off fighting the war. And in 1944, Pete Gray was the MVP of the Southern Atlantic League, the Sally League. He led the league in stolen bases and hitting and all this. And so he earned a chance. So the Browns brought him up. And, it is another one of those oddities that people made comments about. because you got a one-arm player playing. And so some of it thought it was kind of a sideshow and made it. And it actually, in 1945, the Browns actually thought they were going to win the pennant again. They really felt after 44 they pretty much the same team. They were looking good. A lot of the strong super players are still in the military. And Bill DeWitt had put together a team of 4Fs, or he had the schedules during the war. So you had to work in a factory in this city, but we're going to be playing that weekend, in Cleveland, and you're outside Cleveland, so you're gonna pitch one of those games, Denny Gale House and things like that. And they laid it out and they won, and they felt they could do it again in 45. But all of a sudden, here comes Pete Gray into the clubhouse and being put in the lineup, and guys like Mike Kivich, who was the only man on the Browns in 1944 to hit over 300, he's sitting on the bench. So there is some dissension, and some players were really vociferous, and they got traded. And it really did take the wind out of the Browns from a team. There were those people in the stands thought it was a sideshow. But I will tell you, you see there's Pete Gray's glove. He had a special glove made, and we have helped the Hall of Fame restore it with some fundraising, where he could catch the ball, put it up. In full stride he did this, and the glove would slip off. He'd catch the ball and throw it. And he would hit. And so he could play, like I said, he earned it. He was the MVP in 1944 in the minors. But the difference between minor league pitching and major league pitching is wide. And they learned out how to pitch him, and he couldn't adjust with just one hand. That hurt him. But he had a higher batting average than the team average. They won more games in 1945 when Gray was in the lineup than when he was out of the lineup. So, some of this fabled negativity towards Pete Gray is, probably not fully required, because the statistics tell you differently. But more importantly, ABC, when they used to do these like Monday night at the movies, Wednesday night at the movies type things back in the 70s, they did a little bit of a cheesy biography movie of Pete Gray's story with Keith Carradine. And, Pete did have a chip on his shoulder about getting hurt. He lost his arm just above the elbow when he was 12. He had fallen off the side of a truck, and his hand got pulled into the spokes of a moving truck. And that's how he lost his arm. But the biggest thing I always try to tell the Pete Gray story is because there is a goodness to it. You got to remember what was happening in those years, World War II. Many men were getting shot, and many men maimed, handicapped. Pete Gray became a model, a symbol. Look, if this guy can make it to the major leagues with one arm, what's your handicap, You can do something. And you'll see in that second film when I talked about really getting the message across of people's memories and the legacy. I have a man who had polio was rampant in those days. He had a issue with his one leg, and his dad pushed him to play sports, even though his right leg wasn't fully correct. And he would take him to Sportsman's Park to watch Pete Gray, and would sit in left field and say, "Look at this guy. He's only got one arm. You got both legs. What are you complaining about?" And he pushed him using Pete Gray, just like soldiers healed through watching this guy makes the major leagues. I can do something. I'm not going to just sit here and whine. Do it. And this edition of Pop Flies is all about that. And we just had our March Roundtable was all about Pete Gray as well. So there's so many things, whether it's the dementia thing, Alzheimer's thing, the Pete Gray overcoming handicaps to make the major leagues. There's so many stories that baseball can tell just besides a box score.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, man. I appreciate you coming down here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening and watching Backstory STL. We'll release new episodes every Wednesday. Check it out on the First Alert 4 app or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.